For the love of Johnny. My name is Debbie DIGRAZIA. I am the mother of Private John DIGRAZIA. John was my only son. I made this video so that my son's voice could be heard. John joined the Army in the Deferred Entry Program in the year 2008. 1 year later, on July the 23rd, 2009, my son was found dead in his barracks at Fort Riley, Kansas. The military CID conducted an investigation as to the death of my son. After their investigation was complete, they determined his death as suicide by hanging. Why? How could this have happened? I was not satisfied with this finding. Death by suicide, they said, and that was the end of it? It seemed that because the soldier committed suicide, the causes for suicide didn't matter. This disturbed me enough that I retained an attorney, Gary Myers and Associates. I wanted to know why and how this could happen. I believe my son took his life out of desperation, but why? After Mr. Myers reviewed the facts and circumstances surrounding John's death, and after review of all available documents and interviews of pertinent parties, Mr. Myers concludes John's death was suicide by hanging, and further concludes that the principal failure associated with John's death was the failure of the mental health care community at Fort Riley, Kansas. They did not alert command that John was a suicide risk, leaving the command unprepared to engage in preventative measures. As much as this hurts me to disclose John's most private matters, I feel that I must do so that John's voice can be heard. I hope to promote positive changes that will help our soldiers who find themselves in similar circumstances. I believe, as my son did, that no one took his condition seriously. Being isolated, coupled with a sense of worthlessness and a failure, simply overwhelmed Johnny, and he reacted out of desperation, taking his own life. Malpractice, negligence, disregard, misuse of medications, and acts of humiliation became the driving force which probably drove my son to the act of ending his life. I will attempt to shed light on the highly disturbing matter with military soldiers. Following this documentary, you will see unclassified documentation to support my claim. John encountered other problems as well, some of which were not disclosed in the documentation. At times, John felt disillusioned and extremely upset about the treatment that he was given. After boot camp training in Fort Knox, Kentucky, Johnny told me that he was shocked by things that had happened to him. He said it was not how he had expected to be treated. John had experienced lack of care and concern for his well-being. This was the beginning of undermining his self-respect and self-worth. Johnny expressed that he was trying to deal with this as best he could. He had told me that he was a man and that he wanted to deal with these matters like a grown man would do. I instructed him to seek counsel with the chaplain of the pastors of the church on base that he was attending on weekends. And he did. I asked him, if you ever find yourself needing more help, to please ask for it. I also asked John to keep me updated on what was going on. John was sent to Fort Riley, Kansas, where John was doing real well for the first 3 months. No issues at all. Then in February of 2009, John got the orders that he was to be deployed to Iraq. He was sent over to the Devil Brigade for deployment training. Shortly thereafter, while on home leave, Johnny said, "You don't know, Mom. There is no continuity of healthy communication." He also said he felt as if the soldiers in his platoon weren't very friendly and that one sergeant in particular was writing him constantly. I again suggested that he seek counsel for this matter, and he did. As time moved on, I noticed John was not happy anymore. I asked him what up. He said that he felt he was not doing good because he was being dogged all the time. There was too much unrealistic expectations coming from his command. He said they expected me to know how to do things I had never done before. John's spirit was beginning to leave him as time went on. Around the end of March 2009, John experienced a breakdown of sorts and was counseled and sent to mental health for an evaluation. John was given a prescription for sleep, anxiety, and personality disorder. John was so concerned about this because he was soon to be sent to FOB in Mojave, California to do training. John didn't want to take any medications because of the side effects, that he was afraid that it would put himself and the others in danger. During this training, the same sergeant targeted him again, making him do something so humiliating that he felt the need to call me immediately. Johnny would avoid this person as much as possible. As FOB ended, the troops returned to Kansas. John started taking his prescriptions again. John had several more appointments with mental health where he voiced having severe anxiety, confusion, and thoughts of suicide. Again, no one of mental health or command bothered to contact the other about John's treatment. Nothing got resolved, and John was left hanging with this over his head. At last minute's notice, prior to John coming home, command gave him leave. John called me at work with the same sergeant. That sergeant right then and there put him on the spot to demand that I purchase a ticket for him to come home, or else he couldn't come home for leave. John told me when he was to come home that he didn't want to talk about this matter, that he wanted to try to keep it off of his mind and not be bothered by it. I did so reluctantly. While at home, I heard him saying things rather odd, and I saw his demeanor was radically changed. I didn't want to pry as he had asked me not to. He wanted to have a nice home visit without talking about all of this, and we didn't. Mr. Meyer said in his memorandum that 20% of soldiers seeking help died of suicides, and 80% of those who did not seek help died as well. They did not seek help for fear of harassment from peers and officers. He also acknowledged that the little help John had gotten was totally insufficient and could very easily have cost him his life. There were other documentation where John asked for help and did not get it. There were also attempts to get help outside of the military. One such place was the GI Rights, and they failed miserably. On one occasion, John was counseled by his troop leaders and was sent for a psych evaluation again. There was no follow-up, a follow-through by mental health or command. Coincidentally, John's troop battalion had a course training on suicide detection. I know that John's peers, friends ignored or did not see the signs. Whether because of denial or purposeful disregard, I can't say. I do know that more could have been done. I mention this because there appears to be something missing here. The soldiers attend this class regarding suicide, yet there's very little reporting of a soldier considering suicide. One of John's peers asked him if he was in fact suicidal. He saw something in John's behavior to cause him to ask that question. Reporting this would and could have helped save his life. It has taken me some time to recover from the shock of the death of my only son. Now, at this time, I can tell you about his situation with some poise and some dignity. Johnny was an advocate for rights, justice, and respect one to another. John's voice must be heard, even though he is in his grave. He would like this. As his mother, I would do nothing less than to share his story. John always wanted to help this world to be a better place. Believing by sharing this story, I believe that John's life did not end in vain. In Mr. Myers' inquiries, he found evidence supporting the possible causes leading up to the death of my son. He finds the mental health department mostly accountable. These documentations are, in fact, supporting this. I support Gary Myers' findings. However, I believe there are other contributing factors. One has to do with the recruiters. 2, myself, family, and friends. 3, the Army mental health community, the command, as well as the chaplains. Other soldiers, peers, including outside sources like GI rights, and bad drug reporting, misuse of medication. The recruiter making light of my son being treated for ADHD, even though John was diagnosed to have ADHD as a young child. Later, he no longer needed treatment for it. I checked no to the question regarding any present or past treatment. We all minimized the importance of this matter. My part is simple and direct. I did not realize all the encompassing effects this was having on Johnny. When John would share things with me, I would listen as I always did. But when John was home on this last leave, I saw signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. Both because I was so distracted by my own circumstances, I did not address these warning signs. There is not a day that goes by that I don't try to rewrite what happened. Johnny was a high suicide risk, and I did not respond in the way that I would normally have done. In hindsight, I can tell you all the warning signs that I saw. One time in particular, Johnny was afraid to sleep in his room without curtains because he could be seen from all directions. He also said he felt that he had the weight of the world on his shoulders. We talked about things, but it was not in regard to suicide. I am a professional counselor myself, and I did not address this matter properly. I neglected to immediately respond to my son's situation. I did not act as aggressively as I needed to. I am now dealing with the guilt of this every day. The Army Mental Health Department. My son showed signs of major concern as early as his first treatment with mental health in March of '09. These symptoms became magnified during the course of John's prior to his ending his life in suicide. Mental health saw John 3 to 4 times, and in 2 of these sessions, John said he was feeling suicidal. John was also put on medication which specified do not take while operating machinery, and that strict monitoring of them be made possible. Taking, then not taking the medications that he was first prescribed were beginning to have a negative effect. John's case manager failed to inform his command of the urgency to closely monitor John while under the influence of these psychotropic medications. These medications that have been related to sleepwalking, loss of memory, acts of suicide. John's case manager said that John was scheming just to get out of the Army. This is called profiling. The approach and treatment given to my son showed medical malpractice at the highest level. 4, having to do with command. Command was practicing gross negligence with my son. They conspired to say as well that John was being heavily influenced by his roommates. Then John asked them to move him, and they did not. John's command treated him as though he was scheming to get out of the Army. John continued on his own, trying to do his best. Some write-ups had to do with late shows for PT, physical training. This was due to the sleep medication that he was prescribed by mental health. It was all about regiment and not about the person, John DIGRAZIA, a human being. Taking the medications on and off were having the negative effects, as I had mentioned. John's platoon was getting ready to go to the training in the desert. John was so concerned about being on these medications. That is why he talked to me and asked me what he should do. I said to stop taking the medication, go see your case manager as soon as possible. However, command did not make this happen. Command put the order on my son to do not see anyone without going through them first. As I mentioned earlier in John's words, he was left alone. He was left alone 5 nights by himself in his room without support of any kind. All who were questioned during the CID investigation reported that John showed no signs. In fact, they said he was doing great. John was excluded from his troop. He was isolated, ignored, and betrayed. I find this to be quite alarming, to say the least. John was again profiled as a scammer trying to get out of the military. Another note, John's platoon had served 3 tours abroad, and Johnny was a new addition to their troop. There is something to be said about treatment and proper merging of young soldiers into platoons such as this. Johnny was an overachiever, always trying to do what his command wanted him to do. John scored 95% on all ASVAB training. However, John felt the opposite of this. Command at highest chewed him out rather than supported him. Command saw him as a scammer and treated him as such. A few short days prior to Johnny's death, one command went so far as to say, "You are on your own." As with the peers, All soldiers go through suicide trainings. John's troop went through suicide training 2 months prior to his death, and still no one noticed any changes in John. Some signs of suicide are radical behavior change, mood swings, signs of post-traumatic stress disorder, paranoia, confusion, not knowing what to do, despair, weight of the world on his shoulders. John's failed attempts at getting help, taking medications to treat for depression and its side effects on and off, lack of follow-through and follow-up by mental health and command, weeks and weeks of negligence. John showing fear and growing concern as time went on. Johnny was very concerned about his well-being. John's feelings of impending doom kept surmounting. He felt as though he was in a deep, dark place of despair, and his life ended. Johnny reached out for help that never came. John was showing all signs of these. Left alone in a deep, dark place of despair, his life ended. Johnny reached out for help that never came. How could all these signs go undetected? Given the fact that John worked daily with peers and command. The evening before John took his life, he was trying to hang around with his peers up until 2 a.m. in the morning. He was knocking on doors of his buddies, and no one answered their doors. John showed desperately that he wanted help from everybody. Left alone, Johnny's life ended. Johnny reached out for help that never came. Family and friends. Family and friends responded in ways of denial, distraction, and desires of their own. Not one of us thought about John's extreme behavior change. I noticed, but did nothing. Friends and best friends did not mention anything different. John's girlfriend at the time added to some of his stress. As they were spatting for several days, this added to the weight he was already feeling. Bad drug with the Food and Drug Administration. Mental Health had prescribed drugs that had very stringent guidelines. Topamax, for one, an anti-seizure medication with serious side effects, one of them being suicides, mainly used as an anti-seizure med. It was misused. In John's case, it was used for personality disorder. Another Restoril, having side effects such as sleepwalking or memory loss. Restoril was used to help with John's sleep disorder. The tragic death by suicide of John DIGRAZIA, if not preventable altogether, was certainly associated with failure of the mental health care community. John was never considered a high risk for suicide. Again, I would like to reiterate the negligence of both mental health and his command to adequately monitor John. Proper protocol should have been implemented immediately from the very first sign of duress. They failed to implement appropriate and timely measures affordable to suicide risk patients. Not only was the command unprepared to engage in preventative measures, but instead the command treated John like he was working the system to get out. Command judged him as he was a scam, treating John as guilty of this, ignoring the truth of what was really happening with Johnny. How could this happen? As quoted in John's mental health records, most soldiers will tell the doctors, therapists, and command what they want them to hear. The malpractice of mental health is unconscionable. The provider obviously did not value the honesty and earnest disclosures of John. The provider did not take the risk of suicide seriously. The character and professional integrity of the provider is questioned at best. Repeatedly, John revealed his suicidal ideations. With mental health and command together profiled John as a scammer. John was not treated individually. The ball kept getting dropped and no one picked it up and took responsibility. John kept saying to me, "They don't believe me, Mom. No one is helping me." My son was a young man striving to succeed in a world of challenges and measurement schemes. John had higher levels of communications tools, all of which seemed to hurt him rather than to gain him respect. John wanted to do something for himself, for his fellow human beings, like serving his country. He wanted to go on to college, majoring in social service, in particular, advocacy for youth. A recruiter promises John a future that looks bright and meaningful, supported by a system that cares and builds character. John put his best self forward for evaluation. John scored the 95% all across the board in all ASVAB tests. He strived and succeeded at the physical and psychological level of training. But self-doubt crept in. John's coping skills learned in the outside world appeared to have very little meaning or influence. Confusion, isolation, reprimand, fear of failure, questions about self-worth, unknown future, coupled with lack of concern and care, highly impacted the mental and physical state of Private John DIGRAZIA. Rather than doing the right thing to help John, the opposite was done. John first sought counsel with the chaplain of both Kentucky and Kansas. He was prescribed medications. These drugs administered typically coincide with monitoring of the utmost capacity, particularly when high risk of suicide shows up. Patients and soldiers considering suicide are generally afforded constant monitoring and are not allowed to leave or be left alone, and are certainly not put in situations where they are left alone. John faced belligerent accusations and reprimands, enough so that John felt uncertain that anyone had his best interests at heart. John once told me he felt uncertain whether his unit would cover his back. He implied that he felt alone. Whether the mistreatment was intentional or just part of military reprisal modality for men trying to work the system is uncertain. Evidently, my son's aspirations were true. John was left alone, which is the opposite treatment protocol. What saddens me, my son felt the obligation to be there for them and for his battle buddy. John saw in too many instances that no one cared enough to support and encourage him while going through all of this. As Mr. Myers believes, isolation coupled with a sense of worthlessness and failure simply overwhelmed Johnny in reference to the FDA, as recent as 2008, warned patients and healthcare professionals about their use due to the severity of them. Furthermore, patients on Topamax should be closely monitored for notable changes in behavior that could indicate the emergence of worsening symptoms, such as suicidations and suicide. My question is, why then wasn't my son having follow-up from his NCO'S and close monitoring from mental health? Did they all turn a blind eye to this matter of life and death situation? This is such a shame, such an atrocity. As John's mother, I have had to take a long, hard look at what happened. In reviewing the two reports, recalling John's and my conversation, and knowing my son as well as I do, I conclude he did not do this intentionally. I further conclude that the medications had a severe negative impact. It kills me every time I think that my son's life could have been saved if we all would have done our jobs thoroughly. We all have fallen miserably short. As a professional trained in suicide prevention, I can see clearly how all departments can work on change, allowing soldiers the opportunity to get 100% constructive treatment, ensuring that the soldier be treated respectfully without any assumptions by his superiors, peers, mental health, family, friends, and close relatives. When one presumes that a person's behavior is calculated, schemed, then that person is not taken seriously. This is counterproductive and not in any soldier's best interest. There are means to treat such cases with utmost respect, therapeutically and appropriately. Once NCOs send one of their soldiers to mental health, red flag. The need to do continued follow-up is vitally necessary, thus put as a top priority to the day's regime. Mental health needs to then report back to officers anytime there's documentation of suicide, medications prescribed, and a copy of soldier's treatment plan. This would indicate that both need to monitor the soldier. Both command and mental health should get a signed consent from this person, allowing them to make contact with each other, therefore alerting family of the mental state or of their loved one that they can reach out to help. Family then can inquire into the matter further with their soldier, their son, their daughter. There was very little communication with each other. The ball got dropped and this tragedy was allowed to happen. It does not matter what came before the initial request for help. A soldier is to be taken seriously, without reservation. The manner in which he was treated was unethical. John was coerced into thinking this was all his fault somehow, all of his own doing. Again, I would like to reiterate that I feel lives can be saved if the proper approach is taken. From my inquiries on suicides in the military, I found the numbers to be extraordinarily high. Soldiers are taking their own lives. Don't their lives count for anything? After all, the soldiers offer their lives for their country. You would think that their country would look out for them better. One soldier died and more will die until some drastic changes are made correcting this issue. It is said, we never leave a soldier behind. Well, they did just that with my son, and the consequence of this led to his death. I am not going to leave my son's death a disgrace, a shame. I intend to leave him a legacy. Johnny wanted to bring about positive change. I hope to appeal to those that want to make a difference, to step up to the plate, help make changes that make a difference. I felt the depths of despair with the loss of my son. The climb back to the top is a very treacherous one. I know John is one of the many that have lost their lives in this manner. It hurts my heart to know that our soldiers experienced such anguish they wanted to end their lives. One life lost on account of this is one too many. Life ending in our loved ones is just the beginning of a painful grief yet to follow. I heard Johnny say, "Hear my voice, make something good come out of this." Each and every one of us owes our soldiers the best possible care while they are putting their lives on the line for us. There is so much that could be achieved if the right hand was working with the left. When there is lack of real communication, nothing happens. The problem remains. The soldier is then lost. My son fell through the cracks of a dysfunctional system. There are no excuses to justify this kind of neglect. We must vigilantly seek the care of our soldiers. Stop all the profiling. And as this becomes a barrier preventing individualized treatment. We must take the time necessary to help them. They are not a number. They are human beings. Whether it be the recruiter whose job is to recruit, the immediate family who is too busy or distracted, the mental health who practice dangerously by profiling or minimizing, the command being more concerned about orders and protocols, chaplains sworn to silence, outside organizations' lack of vigilance, peers and friends who may recognize something wrong but did not do anything about it, and the Food and Drug Administration for releasing such drugs as these. We aren't powerless. We can take the necessary steps that will ensure our soldiers get the very care they need. If only those who can will. The biggest hurdle I see is the Ferris Doctrine. What I would like to see addressed is the matter of the Ferris Doctrine when our men and women sign on the dotted line. They lose their human and constitutional rights, the very rights they fight for as Americans to enjoy. Congress holds the ready remedy, as has proven in the past. By the Supreme Court denying redress in the United States versus Johnson case, and most recently the United States versus Witt case. Those who can help bring about change, such as congressmen, generals, and our president's wife, Michelle Obama, acknowledges the military family's needs. She admitted to knowing very little, if that anything, goes on with our military families. She put focus on the sacrifice they were making, that our country recognizes this sacrifice. The soldiers and their families are struggling, and she recognizes that. She recognizes that they are strong, resilient, and they don't ask for help. Sometimes it's just little appreciations and a thank you that will make a world of difference. Who is ready to help the soldiers and their families? The families experience PTSD. Soldiers and families both are feeling shame associated with this. Mental health is a major issue, she said. We want to work on destigmatizing mental health problems. In our country, we don't do well in this area. Michelle also said her hope is that military families and our service members will help us as a nation to deepen our understanding of mental health, that the gains that we can hopefully make will carry on to the broader population. Private DIGRAZIA did not receive a letter or appreciation for his sacrifice. My hope that Michelle Obama is serious about wanting to help her deepen her understanding. In her interview, she mentions nothing about nothing about wanting to help her deepen her understanding with S.O.S, survivors of suicide. Why? I am asking Michelle Obama to please take a serious look at this problem and not pretend that it doesn't exist. John went from being a very happy, fun-loving person, full of self-confidence and a desire to help his country, to one of sadness, despair, and worthlessness. His spirit was snuffed out, thus causing him to make a hasty decision in taking his own life. John was robbed of his life. It was snatched away. There is no undoing that can be undone. There is no rewind. There is nothing said or done that can ever bring him back. This is such a shame and a waste of valuable human being. Something needs to be done. My hope is that one day, soon, this will change. I am left with a haunting memory of hearing the voice of my son telling me, "No one is helping me, Mom. They don't believe me." John's cry out for help never came.
Another turning point, a fork stuck in the road.